Okay, here we go. Anybody watching the recording of this afterwards, as always, you can probably skip the first 5 or 10 minutes, would likely be in your benefit. Nothing here, so we have to go directly to the channel, of course. Start off by muting myself, go to edit video, channel content, live, monetization on, and we'll see if it gets a yellow light immediately. Yellow light? Oh no, it's still a green light. Excellent. Actually, it's all stayed green. Usually talking about any of the war stuff gets a yellow light put on it. I don't know why I'm getting greenlit so much while everybody else is usually shut down immediately. Dismiss. Come on. There we go. Okay. Live chat. Time zone. I am unfortunately in the US East Coast time zone because I am living at my parents' place now. I was living in my home of Fairbanks, Alaska. We have to get Google Earth up anyways. Until 2020, when 2020 happened, I got 2020'd by the year 2020, like a lot of people were. But unfortunately, unlike a lot of other people, I did not get to, get my normal back from 2020. So I was not able to go home to Fairbanks, Alaska, and I've instead been stranded down in the regular US, in the southeastern US, which I regard as the second worst part of the US, behind the southwestern US. So I've been stuck down here in the regular US for over 4 years now, as my income has not reached a level that is equivocal to my prior actual, quote unquote, real job that I had before 2020. If my income reaches that level, then I will be able to actually go home because that would be a level that would be independently self-sustaining. But it has not reached such a level yet, primarily because income from doing stuff like this is really erratic. It goes up and down all over the place, depending, on views, depending on how many people send something on PayPal or how many people leave or come on to Patreon in any given month. But the ad revenue from YouTube is like the most unpredictable. Some months it's like $70, other months it's randomly like $400. So it's gonna be at some point when like the minimum threshold stays above what would be the like danger level back up home. But thanks to you guys, at least I'm getting about $80 a month from Patreon solidly. All right, let me look at this stuff. What do we have here, and what will we need? Would it be easier to go that way? I guess. Ew, Taylor Swift. Who cares? So let's go into the Google Docs. I am going to use some of these. So, like I said, for anybody watching the recording afterwards, starting around like 10 minutes probably. But in the meantime, there are these Google Docs. I will be making yet another one of that will be up to 8. But these are like free compilations of data and graphs and stuff you guys can go to anytime. Where they're my versions of things, so they don't look as professional, but I've compiled a whole bunch of data and stuff. This one in particular is the pie charts of electricity generation mixes of different countries and regions. But I have each one of these where I've compiled a bunch of stuff where you can like scroll through it all at once instead of having to go through a Google search and like individually look up each individual country and each individual country's individual subjects, like looking up their electricity mix, then looking up their oil consumption. But to find these, you can go to any of the most recent videos. And in the description under them, you will see the list down here with each of the links. But we're coming here because I will also be using, I think I put them in stream too. Were they here? Potentially? Maybe? Yes, they are. Okay. I started making some of these, the Brazil one I wanted to look at when we talk about Brazil here in a moment as part of the actual video. And was there anything else I need on screen? I guess I could just pull up my bookmarks because that would probably be beneficial, just in case I forget stuff. But I'm pretty confident I have everything written down this time. Uh, Backup home actually is more affordable than actually be living independently would be down here, to the surprise of many people, especially because of the free heating and free water backup home and stuff. But like some of the lower end places that would be within my threshold of like decent places to live up there were only like 650 a month, and then obviously plus electricity. But yeah, I think like for like total total like comfortable living, like not just living off of cereal and ramen noodles, but like including, having enough milk and German chocolate to like maintain my sanity. Backup home would be somewhere around like 800 to 900 a month. Whereas down here, actually, because of the amount of stuff that's stacked on you in the lower 48 US, plus the stress of having to traverse long distances because there's no actual like legitimate public transit in South Carolina, versus back up home where we have the Max bus system in Fairbanks, which is excellent and well designed. And I just flash my ID and walk on. But uh, everything combined down here would be like 1,300 or 1,400 a month to be independent down here versus about 900 back up home. So that actual Alaska is way more expensive than the regular U.S. thing is actually not true. The most expensive places to live in the U.S. is actually like California, New York, a lot of Massachusetts, a fair deal of New Jersey, and I think the other one is Seattle is actually pretty bad. I think around Chicago has actually been coming down, partially because no one wants to live there. All right, so that we did that. How long have I been online for? All right, almost time to start, I guess. And this does look like almost everything. But I guess we can check real quick to see if I have the correct version of France's thing. Which one was this? It doesn't specify. Okay, so I'm gonna have to trust myself then. I labeled this as 22, so this should be for 2022 at least. So then we can up things by 1 year and then by two since we're about to be in 2024. I mean, I would not doubt that Oklahoma is probably very cheap. I just don't want to live in Oklahoma. I don't want to live anywhere in tornado cornland, or sorry, no, tornado wheatland. What are you doing, Google Earth? I want to live up home in Alaska, partially because I'm the most familiar with it, Obviously, excuse me, reset. Okay. Because I'm most familiar with it because it is my home. Uh, eight or three, it was like the perfect place for me. It has actual seasons, unlike the southern U.S. The winter lasts the longest, obviously, back up home, but we do have actual seasons, and I kind of love the whole eternal Arctic darkness thing and the 6 feet of snow every year. Uh, Plus, the people back up home were a lot cleaner and had a much higher average, like baseline intelligence level than the like people you'll run into across most of the regular continental U.S., let alone especially the southern U.S. So I was so like back up home, I never really ran into a situation where I was like, being met with the reality that I'm probably talking to someone with like 25 IQ points. And also, the sides of the road and everything weren't, buried under 5 feet of garbage that people just throw out of their pickup trucks, most of which is beer bottles. And also, like all the roads and buildings and everything down here are like just cracked up as if there were like 50,000 earthquakes. Because in particular, this state never repaves anything because it's broke and has no money. Whereas, back up home, we have some of the best, most well-maintained infrastructure in the country. I don't know what our actual place ranking is. I think one time I checked, it was like third. I forgot who number one and two were. All right, it's probably about time to start. How many do we have? Eight. All right, that's good enough. I have not received a message back from Josh, so I might be completely on my own. And ow, my back, uh, my back's getting destroyed. But I'll actually I won't survive without it. But I don't know. I'll figure something out. Okay, so 2024 is about to begin for uh well, much of the US at least. For most of Europe, it's already begun. Asia, it's already begun. Australia, it's already begun. New Zealand, it began a while ago. I know I have one person from New Zealand. I think they're on my Patreon, actually. But 2024 is going to contain a number of things. We'll also be talking about things that, happened in 2023, since those are kind of going to be affecting 2024. But for 2024, let's see. What do we have coming up? I'll give, I'll do some minor things, just give some people a bit more time to show up. But since I pulled up the France thing anyways, my calculations might be slightly off. It might end up being more like 2025, but this should end up being France's last year of like major or a significant population increase along the pattern that they've seen for the last like 10 or 20 years. Yeah, let's go down to France. Okay, well, not seemingly major from like, the eyes of some other countries, but they've been going up by like roughly 200,000, 250,000 a year for the last decade or so. And this should, but I think 2024 should be the last year of that. If not, then 2025, because this was as of 2022 or the start of 2022. And so, as you see, you have the sudden jump outward, this sudden population bulge that was there post World War II, you know, re jump upwards into normal birth levels. And so add the 2022 and 2023 years on top of this, and that jump up will go up two places to this level here, just under the threshold here that would mark 80 years old, which is about the, French life expectancy. So the one more year of 2024, we'll see this bulging, the start of this big population bulge crossing up over the life expectancy threshold. So into so after this year, this coming year, still technically for the next few hours, is not this year yet. But after this coming year, that is about to be this year, France will then tip over into a basically flat line briefly in population, as if you, where can we get, sure, this will work. If you take this, you draw a line down like that, down to their birth level, you see that's a lot closer versus over here, where there's much more of a gap. So first year goes like that, and then it jumps up a bit more because that was the second post-war year, and you see the gap becomes very small. Then the gap almost shrinks away. However, France does have immigration, but it will effectively hit a plateau point between 68 and 69 million. So it's not going to be going up by 200,000 or 250,000 anymore. And I believe I covered that back in my like population projections video, that France was going to plateau in population before the UK. The UK, I my general expectancy is between 70 and 72, but they won't be plateauing until around like 2030, I think. And they have a bit less consistency in how many immigrants they take in each year. Their number, as opposed to France, has like kind of like a uh, France has like a regular pattern, whereas the UK sometimes like lets in 100,000 people, sometimes they let in 400,000 people. They're really sporadic and unpredictable, very unreliable, but they will keep going for a bit, and they will end up peaking or plateauing a bit over 70, whereas France is about to plateau off between 68 and 69. This year, or this coming year, still 2024, being the last year in which there should be a large or a normal increase, normal in line with what has been the usual, the roughly like 200. What what the heck just happened? Excuse me. Stay on this page. Thank you. What has been their usual of about plus 200 to 250,000 per year. So for 2023, it should jump up, just over 68. And then this coming year, 2024, it should jump up to like 68.2 or 68.3 or a bit under that. And then at that point, it should cross over into plateauing out and, kind of flatten off there around like 68 and a half over the course of the next decade or so. Uh, oh man, drop down to 6. I guess everybody hates hearing about France. Okay. Well, I guess I'll play with that concept a little bit since Canada seems to be the one that everyone stops watching when I talk about. So I'm going to test it then. Canada in 2024 will, at least in terms of important things, Canada will be increasing in net total by a bit over 200,000 barrels per day. And these graphs on this site are always like months behind the most recent data, as I'm not sure why they insist on that, but their graphs only go up to August for some reason. But you can see over the course of time, Canada has gone up to about 4.8, and they will be going up to a flat 5 or so, or just over 5 million barrels per day this coming year over the course of the year, some of which will be renewed offshore production from offshore fields off the coast of Newfoundland, because there is a field that's been offline for a while that they'll be turning back on. And then another like 150,000 barrels per day will be from additional steam lifting well production from up in the tar sands. And did they actually allow the? No, not yet. I think I was trying to think whether they actually signed the thing to allow potential more northern stuff. Uh, no, not yet, but Trudeau's still their PM. I think he did a thing saying that he's like not banning it outright, but and that he's like willing to consider it. Not that he's going to be the PM in the future, so what he says doesn't actually matter. But Canada does actually have like more than likely a decent amount of stuff packed in to parts of their northern basins, especially since they kind of share a connecting thing with us back up home in Alaska, which we will talk about some details of some Alaska stuff as well. The and my mouse cursor is frozen because Google Earth always does this. Please release my mouse cursor. I will get a physical mouse out if you don't. If you make me, I will get a actual physical mouse. Don't make me. There we go. Are we free? We're free. But most of that stuff will be here in the sloping mouth basin area of Baffin Bay, along with the bowl basin of Baffin Bay itself. Although obviously half of that is shared with Greenland, which is under partially the jurisdiction of Denmark, and Denmark is very anti oil and gas, kind of, but uh, Greenland would actually like sort of have the final say, and they're actually okay with like a lot of mining stuff, so they would actually probably be okay with it. But anyways, Canada will be going up to 5 million barrels per day over the course of 2024, and they have kind of leveled off at about 2.5 million barrels per day of demand on average. So that will be a full solid 2.5 million barrels per day that will be constantly coming down to the US. The US, meanwhile, will at least be going up to about 13 and a half. That is that's like the bottom line guarantee. As of the moment, the US is fluctuating between 13.1 to 13.3, and two there are two projects in the Gulf of Mexico that are coming online in 2024 that together are just short of 200,000 barrels per day, along with some still additional production likely to be coming from the Permian, although the Permian is peaking out, ironically enough, or I guess unironically enough, right where I expected it to, about 6 million barrels per day. And some incremental climbing upwards up in the Bakken Shale that will probably guarantee that it will be more than 200,000. So potentially closer to like 300,000 at least upwards for the US. So the US will be up around 13 and a half at least by the end of next year as like a bottom line guarantee. So that's 2.5 coming down from Canada. So that makes total US supply 16. Because their own demand has never recovered from COVID, about 500,000 coming out from Mexico now, so that's 16.5. Uh, -1 from the total 20 million barrels per day of US oil demand, because 1 million of that is technically corn-based ethanol that we put into our gasoline, even though corn ethanol only has like an energy yield of 1.5 to 1, so it's kind of pointless to be doing that. But that's one of many stupid things that the US does that I criticize it for, despite Russia and China fans constantly doing whataboutism or leaving comments in all caps like "Now do America" or "Why do you never criticize America?" I criticize my country quite a lot, especially on a lot of moral grounds and also a lot of infrastructural stupidity. I've been doing that for hundreds of videos across like 8 years now. You just haven't looked at them because you don't care, because you're just having a rage reaction. So, That would be then 17.5, or we'll say 16.5, and just say that the total needed is 19 because you're doing the ethanol thing. Then about 500,000 per day comes up from Venezuela, despite the fact that Venezuela hates us. So that's 17 out of 19. 500,000 barrels per day now coming up from Guyana. That's 17 and a half out of 19. A mix from Ecuador and Colombia that works out to a total between them of about 500,000 barrels per day, coming up to 18 out of 19. About 500,000 coming up from Brazil, which gives 18 and a half out of 19. And then the other 500,000 barrels per day uh, is randomly assorted. Sometimes we get a shipment from Kuwait, sometimes from Iraq, and sometimes from the UAE. But the amount that we rely on the world outside of the Twin Americas continental region is now effectively negligible, and that that margin won't be like going up in a huge amount in the immediate future because U.S. oil demand has, like I said, been relatively flat since about the mid 2000s or so. Where is it's not there? Okay, I have to go this way. Bandicam. Uh, there's the U.S. Should be up here. There it is. This is one of the ones I made that shows like the more individual bi-monthly fluctuations. But yeah, U.S. oil demand has been basically flat minus spikes around the 20 million barrel per day area for the last 20 years or so, primarily staying flat there because of the gradual adoption of fuel efficiency, both in vehicles, ground vehicles, and in aircraft, as it was, adapted at market pace, not at like implemented policy pace. So that's why the US demand level, despite increasing population and increasing economic activity, stayed relatively flat, as opposed to European countries where you saw, hold on, let's, which one is one of various European countries? Uh, Hold on, I'm trying to remember which one's which. Which one is which? Okay, I should be able to recognize, I don't know, Britain or France should be easy enough. What colors did I make you guys? Okay, I am a bit lost. Well, Japan also did. I'll have to use Japan. This should be Japan, I think. But Japan has had both the effect of their aging population and also fuel efficiency, which they started adopting rapidly once that came about. And so, in places like Japan and various European countries, you'll see like sudden, really quick downturns, and that's because of them like implementing things really fast, like 40 mile per gallon minimum vehicle sales for new vehicles being sold. Whereas in the U.S., it was just adopted at the pace of however far or much the popularity of fuel efficient vehicles grew among buyers over the course of time. But so that's roughly going to be staying about the same. Although over the next like 10 or 15 years, post 2024, US oil demand actually will probably decline by, I would say, one, because the US is less inclined towards uh, things than Europe is. Uh, and 1 million barrels per day in Europe for Europe's total. Europe's total collective oil demand is about 12 million barrels per day. Uh, Europe, uh, Europe is so 1 million barrels per day in Europe is like a bigger ratio. Europe will also decline in oil demand by about 1 million barrels per day over the next 10 years. However, one that's a higher ratio for Europe also, and that has more to do with Europe like forcefully implementing things. Whereas in the US, that will be because of like furthering fuel efficiency adoption market wise because of increasing fuel prices and some intrusion by EVs into like the total demand level. Uh, but EVs are going to be running into, metal supply issues that we've talked about in the past. All right, let's see. How many did we dump? Oh no, we actually went back up. 9, although my bit rate is supposedly 0. My bit rate is not 0. YouTube is lying. Okay. Uh, no new comments that are directly questions, at least. All right. Time to then, since everyone's had enough time to show up if they were going to, time to dip into more serious-ish things. So over here, we have the ongoing, about to, uh, transition into a new year of it. We have the ongoing conflict here in the Middle East. Started in early October as Hamas intruded with about 4,000 fighters into southern Israel, killed a number of people that yeah, Israel itself has each month actually admitted that they overinflated the civilian deaths of, and instead of the initial 1,400, they have more recently admitted in mid or late December, I think, that the amount of civilian deaths was actually more like 700 or 800. So Hamas was actually less successful than the Israeli government initially claimed, partially because they probably wanted a bigger costless belly, but they massacred a bunch of people. They got into a fight with the IDF. Obviously, about 1,500 of them, I think, were killed in combat with the IDF in those first few days, along with 300 IDF deaths. And then Israel started bombing Gaza. Yes, it is indiscriminate bombing. You cannot escape from that fact. And over the course of this, we've reached the point now where about 30,000 Gazan civilians are now dead. About 21 or 22,000 known. 8,000 are still listed as missing. The technical term being missing under rubble, which just means they're dead, but uh, probably not going to find the bodies anytime soon. Uh, then there, then there is the ongoing invasion, which actually I don't need to download it anymore. I'm pretty sure they update it daily on the Israel. Oh, right there. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they update it daily on this. When's the last time? Does it say this was updated? Created October 8th. Okay. I don't see an update date, but this is relatively close enough. So this is about the current situation of control. So Israel initially said that it was, for one, just going to invade the northern third of Gaza. That was a lie, obviously. They've also started invading the southern portions of Gaza, and the blue is parts that are now in Israeli control, and so they've relatively captured the majority of northern Gaza, and they're only slightly overinflating the Hamas casualties. The claim they most recently gave was that they've, including the ones engaged with on the during that initial incursion, the claim they most recently gave is that they've killed 8,000 Hamas members. The number of Hamas killed is closer to more like 5,500, with around 1,000 that have been captured or so. So total Hamas removed from combat is around 6,500 out of a total fighting force of about 40,000 dudes. And IDF casualties admitted deaths are around 500. Actual deaths on the IDF side are around 600. And then because of because of well-designed like tanks and armored vehicles and things and body armor and stuff. Most of the casualties on the IDF side have been injuries. However, because of how ambushy, really tight urban combat is, like let's see how uh, unlike Iraq, where the streets, a lot of the streets in a number of the cities were like really wide. In Gaza, it's a lot more like dense. So hold on, Gaza city. Let's see some of the streets. Like those are narrow-ish, but those are still a bit wide. But you can see a lot of these. A lot of these, if you like look down on these satellite images, you could see a lot of like how tightly packed the stuff is, especially with like alleyways and the like. And then portions like this, where there's not necessarily a grid pattern of streets, but where everything's just kind of jumbled on top of each other. So uh, it's been very ambushy, and the number of actually admitted Israeli soldiers that have been injured to the point of combat, like inability to return to combat ever, not necessarily like dismissed from the armed forces altogether, but unable to resume a combat role ever, is in excess of 2,000. IDF soldiers removed from combat, effectively, deaths and like permanent injury included, is around 2,600. So the ratio is, not what it was when they were fighting Hamas in like all these open fields outside of the Gaza Strip during that initial Hamas incursion, where it was like a 5-to-1 ratio. Now it's more like a 3-to-1, sometimes only a 2-to-1 ratio, because of actually, you can see just the gray mess, even on the satellite image. That might have been a better option. You can see just how like dense of a mess this is. The whole idea of like invading the Gaza Strip was really, really stupid. But then again, Netanyahu is stupid. And actually, apparently, most of the IDF is too, because they agreed to this. But they, I guess, just really want to get rid of Palestinians that badly. So this was a really, really dumb idea to begin with, and it hasn't exactly been yielding the results they would have liked. In terms of arms expenditure, as of the most recent huge rocket barrage that Hamas did today, Hamas has fired around 23, maybe 24,000 rockets, probably closer to 23 though, out of an estimated 30,000. And you can tell that you know, you can tell that that margin is thinning, that they're getting closer to that 30,000 total number because of uh, how much more of a gap is coming in between large rocket barrages each time, and how each large rocket barrage is, roughly smaller than the previous one. Whereas Hezbollah has been also firing stuff. Hezbollah is better equipped than Hamas is because they're not isolated. Hezbollah is the large anti-Israeli militant group in Lebanon. They number about 100,000 dudes, of which only about 200 have been killed in the fighting so far on the border with Israel. And they actually have, instead of just unguided rockets, RPGs, and AK-47s, they actually have some anti-tank guided munitions, older Soviet ones from like the 60s and 70s. Not the fire and forget kind, but the kind where they do have to sit in the same place and hold the targeting thing in the camera, like on the tank or on the vehicle that they're targeting until the rocket actually hits it. So they are slightly disadvantaged in that way, but they are on a much higher level than Hamas. And smuggled from Iran, obviously, they do have a number of ballistic missiles, not actual cruise missiles, as far as we know, at least. And of course, they have a bunch of Shahid drones. pin the insert target coordinates, and it will nosedive and explode suicide drones that Iran has that became famous for Russia's use of them in the Ukraine war. They are Iran actually deserves credit for that. The Shahid is actually a well-engineered drone, and it actually is accurate enough. It's not, as accurate as they would probably prefer. It still has quite a bit of an error range, as much as I think like 50 meters away from target. But it is actually a pretty well designed drone, and it actually has decent range. Not that the range matters in this case because it's Israel's right there. But it's estimated that Hezbollah has roughly 2,000 ballistic missiles with large enough payloads. Like uh, 500, 500 kilogram, 500 kilogram yield bombs. Uh, and they just recently, whether it was 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I don't recall exactly, but they did initially fire a few for the first time into Israel. They fired like a dozen, and some of them were intercepted, some of them weren't. But the two that I believe it was two that made it, they weren't particularly on target. However, they don't entirely have to be because the boom is very big. But they didn't like get the results that they would have liked though. And then uh, But so because of all this, and because Hezbollah has really gradually been upping the ante with some of the stuff it's been doing, although it's been doing it at a like linear pace and a very gradual linear pace, but Israel has still reached the point where it's decided that it doesn't want to wait things out anymore. And so they are probably going to be going into southern Lebanon. They have already started massively bombing southern Lebanon, but they are probably going to end up going into it. And uh, they already did their whole Imperial Council announcement a number of days ago, where they said the time period for waiting is over, and what's coming is going to come. Then there is the Islamic Revolution, which is a loose alliance of militias and militant groups in Syria and Iraq that has been doing stuff up in the Golan Heights area, which Israel still occupies, and they are nowhere near as well equipped as Hezbollah is. Out of like the three things around Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Islamic Revolution, Hezbollah is like the most well equipped. But the Islamic Revolution has been doing random stuff along Israel's Golan Heights border. They've launched some unguided rockets. They've fired some RPGs at soldiers whenever they were able to see IDF soldiers that were just driving around in like a jeep instead of riding around in like an armored vehicle. But they haven't done all that much, partially because they can't really do all that much, at least on that end. Iran has tried to smuggle more like sophisticated things to them. However, the various like drop off sites and transition or vehicle switching sites in Syria, Israel has been repeatedly airstriking. The portion of the Islamic Revolution that is in Iraq, however, has been launching rocket mortar attacks, and most recently they have been able to get some of the older, like more basic Iranian cruise missiles, which they have also tried using, and they've injured some U.S. soldiers. They haven't managed to actually kill anybody yet, except for that one contractor who died from a heart attack a couple months ago. They also haven't managed to like damage anything all that vital yet. A lot of the stuff gets intercepted by AD systems, particularly the CIWS things that get towed around on trucks. Hold on. Truck, phalanx, there, CIWS. So we have these. You tow them around on trucks, and that thing is just photoshopped in, but uh, its stuff isn't actually like that close. but it swivels around and it has like the radar unit up there, and it tracks things incoming as small as mortar shells, and then it just like fires 100 and something rounds a second and shreds stuff. Stuff has gotten through though because it can't literally intercept everything, which is also the like worry with the Iron Dome system in Israel is that you know Hamas, like it did on day one, which did overwhelm the Iron Dome system, or Hezbollah, since they have 150,000 rockets instead of just 30,000, or Hamas actually only has about 7,000 remaining. Hezbollah has only fired about like 5,000 since the start of all this, so they still have another 140,000 unguided rockets that they could fire some massive barrage of that could overwhelm the Iron Dome system. And they have threatened that recently, since I forgot what their deadline was, but they gave the IDF like a deadline to leave Gaza sometime next month. I think they said January 7th. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was the 7th. That number's sticking out in my head. But it's sometime this coming month in January that if the IDF doesn't pull out of Gaza, then they are going to do some kind of massive attack on Haifa, this city up here. It's Israel's third biggest city, I think, because it goes Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and then Haifa, I believe is the order. And then I think fourth would be Beersheba. But they're going to do a large, like, rocket assault on Haifa, probably several ballistic missiles included in that as well. If the deadline for the IDF to pull out of Gaza isn't met on, again, I believe it's January 7th, is what Hezbollah said. And then, as an extension of that, since the Houthis know they can't entirely really do anything to Israel, although they do have 200,000 guys, all of whom are, like by all means willing to die and willing to do jihad. They can't really cross through Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia wouldn't allow that, because Saudi Arabia is kind of invested in the current global system that exists because Saudi Arabia wants money. And they can't go up via boats because they get intercepted long before they got there, as some did just earlier today. Although they weren't trying to go up, they were trying to do another hijacking of a cargo vessel at sea, but they got intercepted by the U.S. and British navies, and the vessels were destroyed. And so the Houthis have launched a few Iranian-made cruise missiles and ballistic missiles at Israel, most of which have been intercepted by AD systems, some of which have landed in the very south of Israel on a military base that is on that like southern port tip, and they didn't get to hit like vessels or aircraft or runways or anything, but they did damage a few like miscellaneous buildings on the base down there. Their primary impact so far has been launching suicide drones, missiles, and rockets at various vessels trying to pass through the Gulf of Aden and then into the Red Sea, or vice versa. And they've extended it to basically any shipping vessel. The initial claim and the claim still being made in their defense is that they're only doing it to Israeli vessels, which is no longer true, because now in some of their most recent targets, they used like really extensionist arguments of, well, the vessel may be actually from this country, and it may be traveling from country B to country C, and the companies that are trading goods with each other on the vessel may be from countries D and E, but in reality, the vessel is owned by company F, which is from country G, which is technically a subsidiary of company H, which is from this country, which then also owes money. That company started by getting its loans from this bank, which is a subsidiary of this bank, which is a subsidiary of this multinational trading conglomerate, which is technically owned by Israeli businessmen. So therefore, the ship is an Israeli ship. So they've gotten really, they're stretching the rubber band pretty thin with their definitions of what is and isn't an Israeli ship, into encompassing literally just any ship that happens to be passing through. And uh, that's the okay. Now this one, Ocean Defender gets good information, but again, I don't actually follow him or subscribe to his paid thing because he is very, a kill all Palestinians type of person. So he's toned it down a bit, or at least he had, but now he's kind of ramped it up again. The We are about to, with Britain and an unknown European country, which just means France, we are about to carry out an actual, like, massive striking operation against the Houthis in Yemen with uh, cruise missile launches, airstrikes, and everything. And for those who are, thinking, isn't this a bit late? No, actually, your bloodlust is a bit unfounded. For one, because bloodlust is cringe, and for two, you don't just start doing stuff right away. For groups that are dispersed and, have a lot of stuff hidden, you kind of have to wait a bit and, provoke them with weakness into, bait them into doing stuff so that they, expose themselves, which is kind of necessary. You actually need to know where they're hiding the weapons and where they tend to launch them from. Once they expose enough of that, then by all means you can start hammering. Just don't actually do Russian style hammering. But that's about to happen. Actually, probably check. Has it started? No, not yet. But it is suspect that will be happening in like the next couple days. The full extent of how it's going to go, I'm not certain, like how far we exactly want to carry that. But the idea is to obviously uh, wipe out a decent enough bit of their arsenal and their ability to actually like do things. As the Houthis are about as well equipped actually as Hezbollah is, if not a bit more. They also have Iranian-made ballistic missiles that have been smuggled in. Uh, they have an uncertain number, probably close to 2,000. They've launched about 20 or 30 of those so far in Israel's direction. So, only about 1,970 remaining. They do have cruise missiles, which are better than ballistic missiles. They're more guided, they're smarter. The primary difference, for those who don't know, ballistic missiles are effectively dumb versions of cruise missiles in that you can input a set of coordinates you want it to go to, and the ballistic missile will go up and then come down on those coordinates. That is it. A cruise missile will travel to those coordinates, and depending on what's like how sophisticated the cruise missile is, which effectively means what country it's from. As we found out from Russia, Russia's cruise missiles are not on par with ours like we thought they were. Turns out Russia's just fly in straight lines, which is not what you're supposed to do. That's what you do if you're using early 60s and 70s cruise missiles. However, modern cruise missiles by actual modern nations like the US, France, Britain, Japan will, do like zigzags. And if they're on the higher tier, like JASSMs, I think, then they will actually have like an even smarter capability to kind of like juke out AD systems, not, infallible, kind of like a 50-50, but they're not just a fly in straight line and hit point. And if AD missile is coming up to intercept you, then oh well. But uh, the Houthis have some Iranian cruise missiles, or they had about 360 of them, which are of the older kind. They're not the zigzaggy kind, which made them a lot easier to intercept. So most of them were intercepted before reaching southern Israel as they've made various launches. I think a few have also made it through, like I said earlier, but they've launched about 40 or 50 of those since all this began. So they would still have just over 300 remaining. But since also, what is also on this list? Oh, yeah, and also Shahid drones. Obviously, they have a lot of those. Numbers uncertain, but they have been launching the Shahid drones, especially, is what they've been launching the most of at ships, and a lot of them have hit. However, they, especially because of the size and the much stronger alloys that modern like shipping vessels are made out of nowadays, they tend to not cause that much damage, as they're more really meant to like take out poorly made civilian buildings and kind of more made to like cause people damage as opposed to taking out uh, as opposed to like taking out actually well made vessels or especially like properly armored vehicles and stuff. So a lot of that's going to get hit in the coming days as we start up this whole massive cruise missile barrage and airstrike campaign. Full extent of which I do not know. We will find out eventually, however. And as I said in that previous stream, if you guys missed that one, the one I titled "If There Is an End Game," this might have been part of a number of you know desires on the part of U.S. and allies like intelligence apparatuses plate for a while. One of which would be sort of taking out at least the Houthis' capabilities in Yemen, if not hopefully causing like a reorganization within Yemen that would make Yemen not in its current state, so that it wouldn't pose a striking threat repeatedly to Persian Gulf oil fields, to vessels transiting through the Gulf of Aden and Red Sea, and to future oil production offshore and onshore of Somalia, since it's right there. Another desired goal, probably, especially to get done within the next 10 years because of how things globally are going to turn supply wise in many ways about 10 years from now, after the 2020s are done, would be to have Iran no longer exist in its current form, have it internally, alter itself into a more friendly regime or a more pliable regime, more malleable one, or both. Either one's fine, or even just a neutral one that would still be beneficial. So, despite like things to the contrary, honestly, the U.S. and for their intent to probably Israel as well, uh, honestly, probably want Iran to actually do something, which is part of the reason for not like entirely reacting in any like serious manner when stuff's getting struck like throughout Iraq, is probably a like waiting desire for Iran to actually like do something itself. The rhetoric in like political circles in different countries for actually like striking Iran directly has been going up, but the actual like military command structure almost certainly, as of the moment, does not feel they would have the public casus belli for that yet. Although they are getting closer because several because Iran has actually launched attacks on ships itself directly in the recent week, and also Iranian groups that are getting stuff directly from Iran in present day, not like stuff they got smuggled in the past, but stuff that they've gotten like literally in just the past few weeks from Iran along the Iraqi border with it, have recently struck a U.S. base with several suicide drones and have actually severely injured a few personnel. So that is tipping things more in the favor that uh, the collective like intelligence apparatus is just the general term I'm going to use would probably want. But likely still waiting for Iran to actually like really, really directly do something itself, which is probably going to take a while. I mean, it might happen this coming year, 2024, but there's an equal like chance it might not because Hamas is kind of getting worn down, at least in their capabilities, not necessarily in their total like remaining numbers yet. Uh, Hezbollah still has quite a lot. The Houthis are kind of about to get slammed in the upcoming operation. We'll see how it all turns out. But Hezbollah still has quite a lot, but they might be about to get hit hard if Israel actually does like invade southern Lebanon or just carpet bombs it like they did to Gaza, which would be, a bit more of an outcry issue than Gaza initially was. So Iran on Iran's end is probably, uh, shipping as much weapons as it can, but it's trying to avoid actually like doing anything itself. It would prefer that its various groups that it has loose control over like do as much damage as it can instead, because Iran kind of knows what the actual end result would be if it ended up triggering a military response from the U.S. and Friends Club. Now, because the question will get raised, no, there almost certainly would not, in almost any circumstance, be any actual invasion of Iran because it's just a mountain range, so that would inherently just be a really bad idea. And also, the Iranian people have clearly demonstrated repeatedly over recent years, especially with all the stuff that happened last year, that they have about had it. So they kind of will replace their government themselves if their government was, pushed into a corner where the people kind of felt that their government couldn't actually like brutalize them anymore. One would say if their government's military power had kind of been removed or decimated via a bunch of stealth airstrikes, which we know could easily be pulled off, because as long as you have them flying at altitude, uh, the stealth aircraft are quite capable. They're a bit better than actually we even would have liked, since we did have Israel trial the stealth capabilities of the F-35 for us against Russian AD systems because that's what Iran has. And Israel did strike a few points at the very western edge of Iran with F-35s last year, I believe it was, or early this year. And the F-35s weren't detected because, of course, they weren't. The B-2s equally would be really undetected. And the B-21s would be even less detected, especially if they're flying at their capable 60 or 70,000 feet. But what would happen in like a actual like response against Iran would basically just be stealth striking and cruise missile striking various points of military power concentration and cruise missile and ballistic missile stockpiles and all kinds of stuff. And then the situation inside of Iran would tumble over on its own because it already kind of has been doing that. They are actually, this region down here, Balochistan, which is connected with this part of Pakistan, which is also Balochistan, is full of a ethnic minority in each country called Balochs, who really don't want to be part of Iran or Pakistan, although like they always do, or like any country always does, Iran and Pakistan insist that actually they love being part of Iran and Pakistan. They don't. That's kind of why they've actually started attacking in both Iran and Pakistan, although it's gotten really serious in Iran more than it has in Pakistan. That's why they've started actually attacking various military sites and engaging in firefights with Iran's internal security forces. And they've even blown up facilities at several domestic oil refineries and burned down several of them as well. So separatist uprising is actually already starting in Balochistan, down in southeastern Iran. And Iran also has the 16 million Azeris who live up here, who kind of want to be with, the rest of the Azeris in Azerbaijan, which would turn into an issue if Iran was, getting its military repeatedly struck in stealth strikes and cruise missile strikes. That Azerbaijan, in that particular instance, might actually decide it wants to act on that, in which case Turkey would back them, as Turkey already said they would back them. And then there are also, Iran is also desperately trying to actually get its other minority groups like as angry at it as possible. They've been particularly oppressing the Baha'i people, which are a bit more scattered, but a lot of them are in roughly this area. And they have recently been essentially arresting them at random. They've particularly gone after university professors who are Baha'i people because, they don't want them having a negative cultural influence on the Iranian population. And even more recently, they've started interrupting Baha'i religious ceremonies. And just earlier today or yesterday, they interrupted a funeral to arrest people and drag people away from a literal funeral in progress among the Baha'i communities. So they are like desperately speed running, the make your population uprise against you game. And even the regular Iranian population is not all that happy with the current government. Apart from the other stuff they were like writing about last year, because the government has over the last year or two started canceling all the different subsidies they have that have made life stay affordable for the people, food subsidies, fuel subsidies, and regular, even apart from the subsidies getting canceled, regular inflation in Iran has been going up, and they have lied about the actual amounts. But one, I didn't even check this earlier, so I want to see what are the amounts their government actually does admit to. Food inflation is like some of the most important. Well, last year was, or at least a while back, it was decently bad. So it was at 70% roughly. Now it's around like 30 to 40. So that kind of stacks onto that though. So that's roughly in total 110% higher than stuff was 2 years ago. Because remember, the current months of this year are that is like 30 or 40% higher than what things were last year. So those do stack on top. So these are the actual like public numbers that Iran admits to. This is from the Central Bank of Iran. So that is not exactly going in their favor. So even the people inside Iran that are okay with all the religious suppression laws that Iran does and all the hijab laws are also really uh, dissatisfied with the current regime because the current regime is going out of its way to try to impoverish them as rapidly as possible. Now, not exactly going to like try to displace the displace Argentina, mind you. Where's their inflation? What is this? What are you doing? Not exactly, taking Argentina's place. Argentina is consistently in the hundreds over a single year for inflation percentage rates, whereas Iran only managed to have prices inflate by over 100% over the course of 2 years. So they've got some catching up to do before they catch up to Argentina. But they maybe they'll get there. But anyways, tying back to what that originally was, yeah, the so it is likely a underlying goal of the next 10 or 9 years, hopefully as fast as possible, but as manageably as possible in the eyes of US/NATO/associated friends like collective intelligence apparatus to knock Iran out enough at least and have it internally rearrange itself into a more friendly or more pliable version of itself, or even just a neutral version of itself. Because, for one, that would that would remove a regional threat in the world's key oil producing region, which would add to market stability. For two, just like Iraq did post war, Iran's oil demand level would have at least some version of a collapse. We'll say probably collapse from 1.8 down to like 1 million barrels per day. So that would widen Iran's margin of exports into the global market, increase the available market supply, and without without no longer being a government that's constantly under sanctions, international oil majors would then, under such a scenario, be allowed into Iran and actually recover Iran's oil production back up to at least their 4 million barrel per day plateau, if not the 5 or 6 million barrel per day plateau that they're actually capable of, and conduct oil and gas exploration across this uh, offshore shelf here of Iran and the various inland basins that Iran has that would extend the like Iranian oil plateau lifetime further than it otherwise is going to be under the present scenario. But anyways, okay, sorry for that long drought, but the broad idea is that the at least that I'm leaning towards is that the whole ideal that those making decisions in the U.S. and on Israel's part are probably hoping for is that Iran will eventually feel bold enough to directly involve itself and like directly launch ballistic or cruise missiles either at U.S. Facilities in Iraq or at Israel itself, which will then tip it into enough of a casus belli, in their opinion, to actually conduct like a full military operation to cripple Iran itself. Or if Iran actually like starts attacking ships and backs up its supposed threat to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. But that one might be less likely because they make that threat every year, and they've made that threat every year for like the last 40 years, and they've never actually really done it. But it might change. But for this coming year, specifically 2024, I don't know. I'd still say like 50-50 because Iran would want to play things out with Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Islamic Revolution and the Houthis as long as they possibly can, because they are probably well aware enough themselves of what the overall end result would be if US and friends actually decided to launch a full military operation against them. So they have been holding themselves off and are probably going to continue doing so for as long as they feel is possible to do, while still claiming that and still posturing as like uh, fighting for the plight of Palestinians, or being the force that is fighting against Israel or whatever. Okay, well that took up more time than I initially expected it to. So we're going to swing over into some country by country, slightly more minor things after I check chat. Oh, Josh is here. Reach as a how far can they reach as a strategic threat? Uh, I mean, I think their their longest range missiles are like 2,000 miles. So I mean, they can hit Israel directly if they were to actually involve themselves directly and launched a large number of stuff. Like again what Hamas did with the unguided rocket barrage of 4,000 rockets on that first day in October. Iran could do the same thing with ballistic missiles and cruise missiles that would be enough to overwhelm Israel's air defense network and the various AD systems in U.S. sites and Jordanian sites along the way. But in terms of how much they actually have on hand, we are uncertain since they manufacture and keep a lot of stuff inside of mountain facilities. We estimate, based on what the capabilities seem to be, that they probably have somewhere around like 10,000 ballistic missiles and earlier versions of cruise missiles. They're ones they make in the modern day, but in terms of tech slash generation wise, they're equivalent to 60s and 70s stuff. So in total, we think they probably have around like, I don't know, 10,000. They would not need to launch, they would not need to launch thousands of them at once, like with the unguided rockets, because the Iron Dome is which is meant to intercept the rocket attacks, is much more of a dense blanket than regular air defense systems against cruise missiles and ballistic missiles are. So to actually like fully have at least several dozen make it through the air defense web, they would probably only have to launch like a few hundred at once. But again, we'll see like whether this coming year they actually decide to do something is again going to be dependent on how long they can keep things playing out with Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Islamic Revolution instead, and potentially the Houthis, depending on if that announcement was fully legit and we are about to do a massive strike against Yemen. The Houthis might be slightly out of the picture, but they do want to drag things out with their like associated proxy groups as long as possible, because they know somewhat what's going to actually happen if they trigger a response against them themselves. Because if Iran is actually not Russia, Russia is really dumb. Iran is actually kind of intelligent. They're intelligent enough, at least, in terms of like outward stuff, in terms of how they're conducting themselves with like warfare against their opponents, especially with how much damage they actually are able to inflict via proxy groups without getting involved. In terms of internal domestic handling, then they are like completely and utterly stupid. But in terms of an outward aggressional actor, they're actually really smart. Uh, they're kind of they're as smart as, well, not as smart as we thought Putin was, because people used to like overly jerk it to Putin on Twitter, and were always like posting about how he's playing 4D chess, and it turned out no, he was kind of just flexing his muscles at himself in the mirror in the bathroom. But on to other things, since that took up a bit too much time for my liking. Japan continuing to make intelligent decisions, unlike Germany. Uh, you have the two, former World War II antagonists, Japan and Germany. Both went on massive conquest rampages. Both committed mass amounts of genocide and killed millions of people. And also, just by the acts of what they did, resulted in the deaths of millions of more people. And both, became like despondently repentant afterwards. And now they've split off into two different paths. Germany has split off down the path of being completely brainless, uh, you know, doing everything they could up until 2022 to make themselves as dependent on Russia as possible, constantly, uh, you know, going the route of, like wanting to basically kind of wanting to almost disband their military for all intents and purposes, although they wouldn't actually say that. Uh, and Because all Germany understands how to do is cry in a corner, curled up in the fetal position, rocking back and forth, and screaming, "I was a bad boy! I was a bad boy!" Uh, whereas, uh, whereas Japan, more just like uh, has stood quietly in the corner and like returned to work and done their job, and just not gotten in anybody's way or become anybody's problem ever since. However, uh, ever since we, kind of saw things that were coming with Russia and China eventually, we, approached recently Germany and Japan in the last 10 years and said, "Hey, listen, we kind of need you back. It's time to come back." Germany just kept crying to themselves in the corner and punching themselves in the face and crying about how they were a bad boy. Japan has actually come back as we asked them to come back, and they have swelled their navy. They're not huge ones, but they actually are operating aircraft carriers again. They're using F-35s. They've increased the size of their armed forces altogether, and they were actually like worried at the start because they were going to increase the allowed size of their armed forces by I think it was 50,000, and the Tokyo was actually concerned that like not enough people would even want to join. And it turned out they were dead wrong. They opened up, the limits to extend the a number of allowed servicemen, and it was filled up within like 2 years. So it turned out they were actually wrong about that. Uh, Plenty of Japanese are actually willing to serve in the military. It's not the IJA anymore. It is the modern Japanese Self Defense Force slash uh, help out interventionalistly in areas that can be justified in force. Like they did stuff to help out Somalia off and on, striking some of the militant groups there. But Japan, actually answered us when we said, "Hey, we kind of want you back." So they've come back. They've increased their navy, increased their air force, increased their armed forces in general. They're even going to be operating more tanks and armored vehicles because we all know what's coming. And actually, that's the thing for this coming year, 2024. Uh, maybe, maybe 50-50. Like I've said, I would lean just slightly more towards probably not this coming year. 2025 is the most likely one for China to actually go for it with regards to Taiwan. But they might do it this year. So now that we're entering 2024, I'm just going to speak as if it's already 2024, even though there's a few hours left. But this year is the first year where I will say, like, solid for a solid chance they might actually do it this year. So they've done three fake out years so far. For anybody who wasn't keeping track, the past 3 years, 2021, 2022, and 2023, they have done various fake outs. They have uh, practiced aircraft carrier maneuvers, getting carriers stationed like out here on the opposite side of Taiwan, along with their various destroyers that accompanied them, uh, which would be the position they would assume to launch airstrikes and cruise missile strikes at stuff along the east coast. Although a lot of Taiwan stuff is on the west, obviously, as you can kind of see, and they have done multiple practice sorties of at times up to like 150 or 200 aircraft being sent within just a few hours to pass as close to the Taiwanese coast as they felt they could get away with. And they also, each of the 3 years, have done assembly drills in Fujian province in various cities along the coast, where you could see videos that's before CCP censors got to them. Various Chinese citizens managed to get up on Twitter and TikTok and other places showing the roads closed briefly while very obviously not a parade, despite that's what the CCP's like excuse for it was. Very obviously not a parade of personnel and armored vehicles and stuff was being rapidly moved through the streets and along highways as quick as possible and positioned at various places near different ports, which was pretty obviously a practice run each year in force mobilization and rapid force assembly to, for one, just make sure they have the rhythm of it and to test and know for themselves how fast they can do it. Because no matter what you do the fact that the invasion is imminent will be obvious. That there is no such thing as an actual surprise invasion unless you are the Soviet Union being invaded by Germany in 1941. Apparently, you know, especially going by the various like recordings of radio transmissions that were going among the different like personnel in the Western Soviet Union. Apparently, they actually didn't expect that, which is kind of dumb. I guess the higher echelons, like Stalin and the actual commanders, thought that it was coming, but despite the fact that like forced mobilization on Germany's part along that border would have been blatantly obvious and was blatantly obvious, I guess they were just so drunk they didn't expect it was coming. But there is no such thing as a surprise invasion. You know an invasion is coming. Even even with even with our capabilities, with our massive uh, like amphibious and naval transport capabilities, and our strategic airlift capabilities, in which we have 600 strategic airlifters, the U.S. Air Force does, that we can lift tanks and armored vehicles and troops with. And so we can, in a matter of just a few days, dump a huge portion of the Army and the Marines in some place, even with all the stuff that we have and the different staging bases we have around the world. Uh, you still get warning. Like Iraq in 2003, before we conducted that invasion, uh, Iraq still had like a decent, I think, 6 to 8 weeks of blatantly obvious warning that that was coming. So there is no such thing as a surprise invasion. But China was doing those force mobilization, practice runs to see how quickly they could do it, because obviously, the less warning time you give your opponent, the better things will go for you. But there is no way for it to actually be a surprise. Taiwan, at the very least, will have several weeks of warning that the real deal is actually coming, and some of those forced mobilizations also left some of those vehicles behind in various like underground parking garages and stuff, because nowhere near the same amount of tanks and armored vehicles were seen leaving those areas after the exercises than the initial amount that came in each year. So China has also been like leaving a number of the stuff there to have at least some amount of it pre-positioned. And initially, they were going to wait till 2027, most likely, because that's when their second and third amphibious landing fleets would be complete. Because otherwise, they only have one right now, technically one and a half. By 2025, they will have just about two amphibious landing fleets, which is still kind of pathetic, but it's like the best they can make do with. They can't wait till the third one is done in 2027 anymore, because now Taiwan's going to be in a much better position. See, initially, we, speaking from the US, we're going to start giving Taiwan things like NASAM systems, more Patriot batteries, HIMARS launchers, Abrams tanks, updated Cobra attack helicopters, modernized F-16s. We were going to start giving them stuff in 2026. So doing it in 2027 seemed good to China because they would be the most ready, and also that would be like the last demographic size range that would be in their favor. And also, Taiwan would only have gotten a few, uh, you know, special candies from the U.S. However, after Russia invaded Ukraine, we rapidly sped that timeline up, and immediately that year in 2022, we started giving Taiwan stuff. And we already have dumped off on them a ton of NASAM and Patriot launchers, more Avenger AD system launchers that they asked for. As unlike the others, the Avenger is a very mobile system. It's mounted on usually like a Humvee or a JTLV, so it can literally like drive around, upwards of 70 or 80 miles an hour if it wants to, and be launching anti-air missiles from a highly mobile stance and like erratic direction changing stance. And Taiwan already had 500 of those, but they wanted more, so we're going to give them more. and we weren't supposed to, even under the accelerated timeline, we weren't supposed to give them HIMARS launchers until this coming year, 2024. However, we started giving them HIMARS at the start of this past year, 2023. We weren't supposed to give them Abrams tanks until 2025. However, we've already been giving them Abrams tanks since the start of this past year, 2023. They've already been spotted in several groups in multiple different bases across Taiwan. And the modernized F-16s, we were originally, again, going to start giving them those in 2026. Now we are supposedly on the schedule, are not going to give them until 2025, which would only be 1 year sooner. In reality, though, we are probably about to start handing some of them to Taiwan in the first months of 2024. So uh, we are that's kind of forcing China's hand, both from their angle and from our angle, because that's probably kind of the goal. Since we know this is coming anyways, both us and Taiwan and our associated allies, we know this is coming anyways. So we probably came to, a loose agreement of let's just force it out into the open at the least convenient time for China possible, uh, which would be a meeting point between most convenient for us and most convenient for them, because they would still wait until the best period they could wait until, which will probably be 2025. So there is still a chance they might do it this year, though. If they do, whichever year they do it, it will be in fall because that's when the waters in the Taiwan Strait are the calmest, and the naval force would only take about 6 hours to cross the Taiwan Strait, versus if they did it in spring when the waters are the roughest, it would take nearly 10 hours to cross the strait. So that would be a bad choice. So it's going to happen in fall, whichever year it happens in, and it very well might be this year. But I would still put the chance higher that they would wait till 2025 so that they have a full second amphibious landing fleet ready, because that would just, it would just work out a little bit better in their favor if they waited for that. But the idea for that being force their hand early before they're really ready, so that the probability, which is already against them anyways, because for one, this is just stupid, and for two, it's a massive long distance naval amphibious invasion. It's not even D-Day. It's not crossing the English Channel. It's crossing the Taiwanese Strait, for hours of journey under fire from precision guided targeting munitions, because this isn't the 40s anymore. Your amphibious landing fleet isn't going to be getting targeted by just artillery shells that are fired on a arcing angle hoping they hit the target. You're being targeted by actual like precision guided munitions. So this was already going to fail. Now it's going to fail even more. But the idea is, force their hand, make them act early before they're really ready. And whilst Taiwan will be more ready than they would have been in 2027, so that it fails harder. And in the internal economic fallout, China's oil demand collapses by, I did a conservative estimate in that previous stream I did of maybe like 25%. So they drop by 4 million barrels per day of oil demand, which, then opens a bigger portion of breathing room on the oil supply markets globally, than just Iran losing 1 million barrels per day of oil demand would. So you got that coming, and then you have the thing I was originally going to say about Japan, which I went way off from. So the other thing that differentiates Japan and Germany, in one being stupid and the other being smart, is Germany cut down all of their nuclear reactors, because Germany is oh so intelligent. Japan, after implementing, new ultra hyper safety features into all of their nuclear facilities across the country, that would effectively make them all just shut down on a dead man switch without human intervention if something catastrophic happened. which you can actually see that for various portions. That actually happens all the time. Here, let me show you here in the U.S. You can see this magenta line is the nuclear power line, and you see these really brief dips there. You might not be able to see it, but if you go to this, you can see the URL there. If you go to this, you can see those sudden but brief dips that happen. Those sudden but brief dips are actual like trips in the system of different reactors across the country, having their safety system tripped. Usually, again, it's a miscalc. It's not an actual danger at the plant, but just to show you that the modern safety systems work. These are reactors briefly shutting themselves down, or really at least really dialing down their power output to a level that would be safe because the safety system thought something was wrong and just automatically acted. So Japan has put all that into their nuclear reactors now, and the Japanese government just gave the go ahead for the restarting of Japan's biggest nuclear power generation facility, which is also the world's biggest nuclear power generation facility, which is on their west coast, I think around here, and has a output when it's actually running, which it has not been for the last 12 years, but it will be soon. The idea is to have it fully back up and online by sometime in 2025. So some of the reactors will be getting turned on over the course of this year, 2024. And at full capacity, it can generate 8 gigawatts of power generation. So that will shove out some of Japan's coal fired and gas fired power generation and will, put them back onto a much better power source. But, you only have to, depending on the reactor generation and the particular fuel composition of the reactor fuel, you only have to refuel every 2 to 3 years. And, in between that, it just infinitely generates power at a constant rate. So that will shove out some of their other stuff and will, by the time that power plant is fully back on, if no others are turned on at the same time, will bring Japan from 11 back up to 19% nuclear power. And if all of Japan's nuclear reactors are turned back on, then they would be displacing the coal and gas that they substituted them with. That would bring them up to about 1/3 total uh, of their national supply coming from nuclear power, because that's what they had before 2011. Whereas Germany has now gone down to, as of the end of this year, zero nuclear power, because Germany is very intelligent and very green. They especially, along with the other European nations, are really, proclamative about how green they are. So, in being so green, they shut down all their nuclear power plants and have replaced them with coal, because that's how green Germany is and intelligent. Okay, what else do we have on here on the slightly minor stuff list? Oh, yeah. Okay, so uh, I guess I'll do the Ukraine stuff since that's going to be like uh a longer thing. I'm going to try to shorten it because I was supposed to have this stream done by 8:30, and I want to try to still meet that goal. I probably won't, but I will try. Anything from chat? Any super chats? No. Uh, and nothing else I need to respond to. Okay, so switch over to this side of the page here. Stay straight, you stupid piece of notebook paper. Okay, so in Ukraine, news and updates. Uh, despite denials by both Ukraine and Russia, the F-16s are almost certainly already in Ukraine because uh, basically Russia has been maintaining the same pattern of risky aerial bombardments over here, which are further away from their operable air bases now, since basically everything within Ukraine has been closed off because it's in range of Storm Shadows and ATACMS missiles. And the Russia, after being on like a general pattern of losing about one aircraft per week, all of the sudden, earlier, okay, it's not this week anymore. Now it's technically last week. All of the sudden lost like 5 or 6 aircraft within 48 hours. And they went down roughly in this area. And both Russia and Ukraine insist it was just ground based AD systems. However, most of them went down outside of the range of those systems, which would mean the only other like explanation would be that Ukraine actually risked bringing those over across the Dnipro, and then also like drove them a bit further past Russian lines. So the actual likelihood, since it would not be able to be Ukraine's like current aircraft, because Ukraine's current aircraft are old Soviet stuff and are in a bit worse radar tracking range condition than Russia's are. So that kind of leaves the one possibility, and that's on the very earliest edge of when I expected them to show up. The F-16s are actually already in Ukraine because if you remember back at the start of 2023, I was commenting on the U.S. and allied partners saying that they are going to start training Ukrainian pilots on F-16s in the fall, and Ukraine would probably have F-16s by the summer of 2025. And what I said back then was, okay, what that actually means is that we've been training Ukrainian pilots on F-16s since late 2022, and that they will probably get F-16s in field by early 2024, maybe a small chance of it being the very end of 2023. That was one of the streams way back then. Uh, you can go back and look for the actual audio if you want to, like check me on my words. I'm not going to go sorting through 80 hours of audio for you. But so it looks like it ended up being on the very, very early edge of when I expected, because and that, that kind of fits because literally everything that I've sort of called in every direction, energy stuff, oil and gas, war developments, when conflicts will happen, literally everything has been like at 90% of the time, I've been like correct about the thing itself, but the thing happens earlier than I think it will, because everybody is on a speed run in like every regard of life. Everyone is just speed running everything. So I'm gonna have to ditch the actual like time frame expectations at some point because everyone always just does everything like immediately after I say this country or this group is probably going to do XYZ 3 years from now. Like the next week after I say that, all of a sudden they do it. So I'm going to have to stop the time frame stuff eventually because everyone always does things way early. But so it looks like the F-16s are in Ukraine. Uh, Although, as you would expect, Kiev is denying as much. Uh, NATO allies are denying as much, and Russia is also denying as much. Although, as someone on Twitter did point out, uh, Russia will probably switch its tune before Ukraine does because they will try to spin it into, yes, the F 16s are already in Ukraine and we've already shot down 500,000 of them, as has been their pattern of everything. Like the claim they shot down 300 Bayraktars, even though Ukraine only got 24. And at the point that Russia said that, 300 Bayraktars had not even been made in like total from Turkish factories yet. Only about 250 had. So I'll expect those claims to come from Russia soon. Soon enough, they'll switch to yes, there are F-16s, and we already shot down 1 billion of them. But the situation as of present, it's in streams. Go to here. So this is obviously the present situation of control. And over the last number of months, as I've said in some previous streams, Russia has been doing a relentless wave of suicide attacks in and around this area just outside of Donetsk City, where they're just sending waves of hundreds of dudes, sometimes thousands of dudes, along with dozens to sometimes hundreds of vehicles, and also kind of revealing that the number of equipment they supposedly have in terms of like capable armored fighting vehicles and IFVs is probably BS, because they've stopped actually using them and they've been resorting in these these bonsai charges. They've been resorting to using actual just trucks along with amphibious river crossing vehicles, which are meant for exactly what they sound like they're meant for. They're meant for ferrying troops across a river or a marshland. They're not meant for like rapid charges across an open plain because they're not fast and they're not that armored. They're kind of just mobile tombs. And so in their in this mad dash to take Avdiivka is the primary one. In their mad dash for Avdiivka, that's brought about the deaths of about 14,000 dudes, and it has gained them 2 whole kilometers. So, 7,000 deaths for 1 kilometer of advancement is, I guess, an okay trade. And the reason for them suddenly doing this, though, like I've said, is probably this. This is probably the goal because Putin's, quote unquote, re-election is coming in March, and he would probably like at least this to seize the rest of Donetsk Oblast so that he could then at least before the election, preferably pull a, like a victory excuse, and you rely back on one of the 50 different supposed reasons for the invasion, which was that they were going to liberate the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics. So if he could manage to grab the rest of Donetsk, then he could actually, pull out of these places and end the conflict on a note of supposed victory, uh, and probably actually pull out of Kherson and Zaporizhia, and then do the backpedaling excuse of, well, we never intended to actually keep those anyways, just like they did with the North, just like they did when they got pushed out of Kharkiv, and just like they did when they got pushed out of the western portion of Kherson Oblast. So that would probably play the same way, because that's like the one true, potentially achievable excuse that they have left that they could then, assert as a victory by, doing the spin around and saying, well, this was actually the goal of the war the entire time. Everything else was, as the meme went back in 2022, everything else was just a feint, bro. So that is probably the goal, is a mad dash to seize the rest of Donetsk Oblast, and it has not gone as desired. Like I said, they got 2 kilometers. So out of I don't know how far would they need to actually go. It's about there. Hold on. Let's use a distance thing. So we'll be nice and use a. This point looks a bit closer. So about there, at the edge of the Russian D. So go to the lesser number, and we'll round down 50. 50,000 meters, so 50 kilometers. So they got 2 kilometers out of 50. So that's, that took about 3 months. Um, it's not exactly the best results. So another 48 would be 48 times, 7,000 deaths. So that would be 40, 200, 280, almost 350 minus 14, and then we'll round down. So about 330,000 more deaths and, a few thousand vehicles that they don't have to expend, and they could, push through the rest of Donetsk. In terms of total, in terms of equipment totals, cruise missiles, Russia, oops, I did not mean to click on that, whatever that is. Where's the option to X off? Where's the option to X off? Shut it down. Where's the, shut it down? Oh, does it automatically shut down? Okay, that's better. You may have heard Russia recently launched a massive cruise missile barrage on Ukraine of about 100 missiles, which jumped their expended total from 3,800 up to about 3,900 since the start of the war. And at the start of the war, Russia had about 4,000 on hand. And since the start of the war, assuming their factories have continuously operated and operated at full efficiency, they have probably manufactured between another 1,200 to 1,300. So rounding up on generosity, that's a net total of 5,300, of which, as of this massive attack, they've expended 3,900 out of. And they still did not use them to attack any frontline positions or any military targets, any staging areas, even any railways. They still decided to use them to attack schools, hospitals, and apartment complexes, which, the past 2 years of that accomplishing nothing should have if the command structure in Moscow was actually capable of learning, that should have gotten through to them that that's not getting results. Ironically, uh, Russia would actually be in a much more advantageous position and honestly could have probably won in at least in loose terms if from the very start they had used, for one, this many cruise missiles and used them all consistently on military targets. But that's not Russia's style, as Grozny down in Chechnya showed. So that's 3,900 out of 5,300 net total, and the remaining 1,400 they can probably use up to 1,000, I would say, because remember they do have other military forces. They do have other fleets. They have Baltic Sea Fleet, the North Sea Fleet, and their Pacific Fleet that kind of need to have cruise missiles in their launchers on their ships, unless Russia is willing to get down to the point of not having any at all, which would be kind of stupid. So they can do a number more of these like giant wave attacks if they want to. But if they're going to keep this targeting pattern, it's not going to do anything for them. And we have developments in unintended casualty admissions. The broad likelihood, Russia obviously understates, Ukraine overstates. Ukraine overstates in the direction of between 350 and 400,000 Russian soldiers dead. Russia understates in the direction of still to this day only claiming that 13,000 Russian soldiers are dead. However, they did at one point towards the end of September of last year or last year, 2022, accidentally admit that 53,000 Russian soldiers were dead by that point. When someone in their interior departments leaked out one of their papers about how many payments were released for the families of deceased soldiers. The more likely number is roughly around 200,000, and wounded, if you include wounded, then that takes it up closer to probably 400, which is probably what Ukraine is then using, is stating the combined wounded and dead total as just a dead total. But The Russian Ministry of Labor sort of accidentally admitted that it has, as of the earlier half of this year, issued 260,000 payment certificates for dead or injured to the families of dead or injured Russian servicemen. Uh, I'm going to assume, based on Russia's pattern of repeated denial of casualties, that that was an accidental public data release. It might be intentional, for all I know, for some reason. Maybe this is 4D chess and I just don't understand it. But they did now, like they did with the 53,000, although this is a combined casualty accidental admission, but they have now combined casualty accidentally admitted to in excess of 260,000. And then we have vehicle totals we have here so far. Out of modern tanks uh, that they have like kept active in their arsenal, they are now over 2,400 losses out of 3,200 starting on hand, plus 250 that have been manufactured since then. 100 were made in 2022, 150 were made in 2023, and Russia claims that they are going to be able to manufacture 600 this year, which is interesting because Shoigu claimed that they manufactured 1,500 in 2023. So that's kind of a massive downgrade from the boastful number that he claimed during 2023. But we'll go with Russia's assessment that this year they'll be able to manufacture 600 supposedly. In reality, it'll probably be closer to like 250, assuming they are able to increase the number further. But though they seem to, from what we've observed on satellites, come in 3 shipments over the course of the year. So if Russia is correct about their manufacturing capability for this year, that would be 3 shipments of 200 new tanks coming towards the front over the course of the year at different times. But for the moment, total modern tank losses are about 2,400 out of a net total of around 3,450. IFVs and AFVs are around 3,700 out of a supposed 5,600, which is again probably fake because they've kind of broken down and are now predominantly using old BP-1s pulled out of storage and or just using trucks and amphibious river crossing vehicles. Uh, Self-propelled guns or howitzers, again, as always, for people who are unfamiliar with them, use the Paladin for example. This is modern artillery. This is a howitzer, is the general term. Uh, they and the primary thing is they mostly move around themselves now, as opposed to being drawn around by trucks or being drawn around by horses. But Russia has versions of these as well. They just look different, obviously, and they use a different size. We use 155 millimeter. They use 152, I think. Russia supposedly had about 1,600 SPGs at the start of the war, of which they've lost close to 700, and 300 of those have been in just the few months since Ukraine broke through the minefield and initial defense line positions around here. And Russia has stopped any advance of that and been holding that off for the last few months by maintaining in this semicircle here basically a curtain of continuous artillery fire that's prevented any form of further advancement from that. So that will be held off indefinitely, in theory, for as long as, however, long Russia can maintain that curtain. And that will obviously be determined by how many SPGs they actually have, because the SPGs are kind of the actual key. They do have like regular towed artillery, obviously, but it's they're really not wanting to use that because it's just way less mobile and just gets taken out quicker, much more easily. Although they're losing SPGs rather quickly still because they're not taking the time to like hide them and position them and really to maneuver them around after firing a few rounds because they're just maintaining this constant barrage of artillery fire, which again it is working. It is holding off any form of like further advancement, but as long as they maintain that curtain, there will be no further advancement this way. And at the roughly average rate that they are losing SPGs, not just here, but also across the rest of the battlefield as well, because they are using some in Donetsk, and they are also using several dozen over here, firing on the Ukrainian bridgeheads that Ukraine's established by crossing the Dnipro. However, they're unable to dislodge those forces because, as I've said before, a lot of the shells that Russia is using, especially now that they're becoming reliant on North Korea to ship them artillery shells, which kind of, disputes the fact that uh, Russia was previously bragging about being able to manufacture everything for itself and being able to pump out 1.5 million shells per year or something like that. Uh, you know, Having to order hundreds of thousands of shells that you gave to North Korea generations ago kind of disputes that fact. But these aren't like smart munitions or proximity ones. They're impact ones. So they have to impact something. And in a lot of cases, this is again the post-flood ground after that dam was destroyed. So everything is very muddy. Even outside of Ukraine's mud season, it was already very muddy. So the shells are just hitting the mud and going like into the mud by like a meter before they're encountering enough resistance to detonate. And so the mud is just soaking up so much of the blast that they're not like actually causing the kind of casualties and damage that they want. But depending on how the continued attrition rate of artillery goes, and also obviously depending on how truthful Russia's supposed number of 1,600 SPGs at the start of the war actually is, then you have a wide range of when the curtain could potentially fail, when they could potentially no longer be able to actually maintain enough to have that constant artillery fire. And uh, if we assume they have a like, if we assume the somewhat lesser loss rate of like the last month and a regularly slightly truthful tone to that 1,600, in that it's still not 1,600, but it's probably like 1,400, then in theory the curtain would fail at the current loss rate around like October or November. If we assume a reduced loss rate and that Russia is entirely truthful about those numbers, and that they actually manufacture the additional like several hundred artillery pieces they claim they're going to this year, if that actually manifests, then they could theoretically hold that curtain until 2025. But their manufacturing numbers have not actually been impressive as of late. Now, also recently, uh, did make it to regular mainstream news outside of electoral politics and stuff. Uh, the the port, I believe it was at the port in Fedosia, but Russia's final large lander ship that it has in the Black Sea, it had six of them, got struck by long distance Ukrainian missiles, and that blew up and sunk. And oops, I went off here. I should still have it in my bookmarks. I think it was a few weeks ago, so it's probably a ways down. Oh, no, here it is. This is satellite imagery of it before and then after, and also, a lot of the port infrastructure was taken out. But yeah, so that was their final out of their six lander vessels that they've been relying on to ship stuff to and from Crimea a lot, and to ship stuff in and out primarily Berdyansk, to get stuff more directly to Zaporizhia Oblast. Uh, 5 out of the 6 were like destroyed. One of them was only like moderately damaged, and according to the Russian military, it should be repaired and could return to service as early as the start of March, so within 2 months. So they could go back up to having one operational, but being down to already having only one operational, this one that just got destroyed, they, as I showed you guys a few streams ago, were already resorting to using the individual landers, like the smaller uh, beach landers that then come out of those large landing ships that tend to carry like one vehicle or 20 dudes at a time. They were resorting to actually using those to transport stuff to and from Crimea, and several of those also got sank a few weeks back. So they're not really being able to get enough stuff around as they would like. The primary thing they're directing everything to is maintaining that curtain of artillery fire. However, they're not being able to like get as much in as they would want for the whole Dnipro River crossing stuff, and that has actually resulted in gradual expansion of this stuff here, as it was initially just a few like pockets. However, they've now been connected in terms of area of control, and are very gradually sort of stretching connection up along the coast, which is, creating an actual additional front that Russia has to direct stuff against to, and just taking advantage of the mud, which in the past like 2 years, we previously talked about, or anyone who spoke about this talked about the mud being a disadvantage for both sides for like up until this point, because the mud is usually what obstructs large vehicle movements. However, in this particular case, on Ukraine's end, the mud on the riverbank is actually really beneficial because it's absorbing and tanking a lot of the artillery shells that are being fired at them. What else do we have on this end? Oh yeah, so remember, I told you guys shortly after this all started, way back in 2022, in April of 2022, which was when all the global oil majors left Russia, the ones that rescued Russia's oil production levels after the USSR collapse, which happened because of mix of internal breakdowns, and also the borders were open, so a lot of Russia's oil engineers, former Soviet engineers, just left. So the oil majors came in the late 90s, and over the course of the early 2000s were able to quickly rescue a fair bit of Russia's oil production, although a decent amount of capacity had been lost. And they were then able to push Russia up to about 10.8 million barrels a day. Or sorry, back before 2020, they were up at like 11.2 or something. Then they got up to about 10.8. And I took this screenshot like way back in February, but they went like that. I showed you guys the more modern stuff in a recent stream, or it might not have been that stream, might have been a video, but they did that. And then I said in April 2022 that probably a year or so after the oil majors left, Russia's oil production would start to experience a downturn that they would not be able to fight. And initially, though, Russia dropped their oil production by 800,000 barrels a day pretty immediately because of rapid customer absence from Europe turning away from them. So that's dropped them down to 10. And then, right around the start of spring of this past year, 2023, the time frame that I had initially, said, they suddenly announced they were going to enact production cuts, and they dropped by 500,000 down to 9.5. Then at the end of summer, they announced they were going to go further down to 9.2. Then in late November, with the OPEC Plus stuff, they announced they were going to go even further down to 9. Well, now all of a sudden, they've announced that starting at the beginning of this year that's about to start, so in January sometime, they're going to cut down even further to 8.8 million barrels per day. So, for one, that is, kind of indicatively obvious because they wouldn't, just like, Persian Gulf nations aren't going to admit when their plateaus are ending, Russia's not going to admit that it's can't maintain its own oil production without outside help. So it's going to disguise it as, voluntary cuts to support the market. So that, for one, is like a giveaway. But also, this is I was probably incorrect about the speed at which this was going to happen. I assumed it would follow a similar post USSR nosedive pattern of that 1 year holding out, the second year, the first year that the downturn actually starts, so from spring of 2023 until spring of 2024, a downturn of 500,000 barrels per day, and then it would drop into a plunge of 1 million barrels per day lost per year. However, if I'd been correct about that one, then Russia's initial cut from 10.8 down to 10 million just because of European customer absence should have been enough to conceal the production downturn until, at least summer of this coming year, 2024. So they've instead, though, gone all the way down to 9 and are about to go even further down to 8.8. So it looks like it's actually downturning way faster than I was expecting it to. So I'm not entirely certain as to like the variables behind that, but in terms of how far it might drop, uh, go back to this actually. It was here. In terms of how far it might drop, the floor that it probably can't go below would, based on the background conventional decline rate, be around 4 million barrels per day, because the floor that it had last time was about 6, and that was because 6 million was what was coming out of conventional non-Arctic, non-permafrost fields. Whereas the majority of what Russia is producing now was coming from Arctic and permafrost fields. And so that background conventional decline would probably be down to around 4 million. So they, I would say almost certainly, like 99%, they would not slash will not fall any lower than that. And actually, honestly, they probably still won't like fall further than like 5 or maybe 6. But it is happening faster than I expected it to. And also, in terms of, as I spoke of in the previous video, if there is an end game video, if uh, if accounting for that into like some possible like uh, U.S. plus friends intelligence apparatus goal, since the drop in oil production would sound counterintuitive to how that seems set up so far. Yes and no, because the goal of like baiting Russia into bogging itself in Ukraine and inevitably sort of shrivel crumbling internally would be that it removes Russia as a negative actor from the view of the general intelligence apparatus, because it would result in inevitably, eventually at some point, Russia having an internal realignment of sorts. Whether coming out as a more friendly government, a more pliable government, or even just a neutral government, as opposed to an antagonistic one that very easily could and has repeatedly off and on done and threatened to use its oil and gas as a leveraging threat. The idea would be this is, a necessary thing to incur temporarily to get Russia internally realigned so that they come out as a more consistent supplier in the future, and also that production drop that they are now undergoing, that has been induced by the oil major pullout, can be reversed, within a number of years once the oil majors re-enter, as they did in the 90s and early 2000s. So in that case, the supply can be restored. It's a case of we did it before, we can do it again. Granted, it will not come back up to like 11 million barrels per day. It will probably only the initial reflare over the first few years once oil majors are allowed back in. The initial reflare would probably only be up to like 9, maybe 10. And then from there, things could creep up as in the future stuff is done off of Russia's Arctic waters and in some of their further basins that they haven't really touched, like this one here, this sort of boot that comes in from the Arctic Sea and comes in into this basin valley like this boot shape. And then the other major one is this one here that you can kind of see outlined in this gray. This is like a low-lying basin thing that's kind of everything else, even at least a few bits of the Sea of Okhotsk, uh, everything else has been like either thoroughly explored or at least has been gone into by this point. And there's one other thing. Oh yeah, so uh, in terms of birth rate, Russia continues dropping as a result of their Ukraine decisions. So you can see uh, these don't update that often, unfortunately. But just the first result you'll get if you just look it up is this one here, and you can't actually move the point along anymore, at least I don't think. So they had been recovering, then the economic fallout from 2014. Something happened in 2014, another poor decision, caused them to drop down, but they had kind of leveled out here. You can barely see it starting to flatten there around 1.5. And then post Ukraine invasion, they, over the course of the first year, dropped to 1.28. Then it looks like, as of the numbers for this year, over the course of this year, this past year, 2023, they've dropped down to 1.15, which is just about where they were at the absolute bottom during the 90s. And there's two different expectations, one released from the Russian government or from one portion of the Russian government that is not the Russian Social Fund, at least, that says, don't worry, it's only going to drop from 1.15 down to 1.12 this year. However, the Russian Social Fund, which is, I think, another portion of the government, uh, says they expect it to drop from 1.15 down to 1.1. Uh, the reality will probably be slightly more, but not by like that much, probably like 1.09. But as an overall result from all of this, especially when things crack inside further, which the first signs of have kind of actually started showing up over the last couple of months, Russia's going to end up below 1. Yeah, they will still probably not go anywhere near as low as like uh, China is going to end up going, or even as low as South Korea has gone. South Korea has actually reversed ever so slightly. They got down to like, I think, 0.77 or 0.78. And over the last couple of years, they've just so slightly nudged to 0.80. It's not that much better, but it is better. Meanwhile, China, with all of their fascinating decisions, has erased their recovery up to 1.7 or 1.8 and dove all the way down to, as of the start of this past year, 2023, or this current year still, 2023, something like 1.06. And probably as of the start of this year, 2024, when that data comes in, it's going to turn out that over the course of 2023, China dropped down to like 0.97. So, but 1.15 is where Russia is where Russia has gone down to over the course of 2023. And as I said, over the course of 2024, it is expected by one part of the Russian government to go down to either 1.12 or by the Russian Social Fund to fall by a bit more to 1.1, with the reality likely coming in about like 1.09, maybe 1.08. And some of the specific demographic information I used to get about Russia from that former demographer who fled at the start of the war and has been living in Istanbul. Unfortunately, I can't get that anymore because, assumably, the FSB got to him with some level of threat, whether to him or to his family, because he all of a sudden, a few months back, started making posts where he profusely apologized and said that everything he had previously said was false and that everything that the Russian government says is true and that the Russian government has the Russian people's best interest at heart and that there is no demographic collapse and that Russia is doing better than ever, and to please disregard anything he ever said. So, sudden out of nowhere 180 turnaround. So somebody found him, although that's kind of pathetic on the FSB's part because everybody knew where he was. So it still took them like 2 years to get to him. But it looks like they finally got to him. Whether, I don't know, whether threatening himself or threatening his family, I don't know, but they eventually got to him. And then, uh, now moving on from that into other areas, as I try to wrap this up at least before 9 Eastern Time, we have OPEC. So, for those who might not have heard, Angola just left OPEC a few weeks ago. So, OPEC has shrunk by one member, lessening their oil market control. And that has made things interesting. So, I've told you guys that Iraq almost certainly and the UAE probably are going to end up leaving OPEC like soon enough, like probably within the next 10 years, because the group effectively is just Saudi Arabia's play club. Saudi Arabia is the one who like makes the cut decisions and everyone sort of just listens. And they're getting really tired of it. Iraq, especially since they're not, a filthy rich Persian Gulf nation like the others are, and they would like to be. However, they've been prevented from producing at their full capacity, which would be somewhere between 7 and 8 million barrels per day with their current fields that exist, not including all the undiscovered oil in the roughly 30 to 40% of the country, this area here, that has gone largely untouched. They did just do a lease sale in the second half of this year. So this area right here on this side of the river, the north side, this portion that was still untouched just got leased off. And basically, because the oil companies know that Iraq is full, basically all of it was bought. So this area here will now be undergoing, over the course of this year, 2024, at least the seismic testing portion, because oil and gas exploration does take a bit of time. You have to first do the seismic testing, which maps the underground and shows you if there's any like vacuous anomalies that you can then investigate. And you also have to do the core samples themselves to get an idea of the geology of the area, so that you can know that if you find any anomalies that might be petroleum, if they are worth even testing in the first place, because is the geology correct? Are they, porous sandstone layers? Which, granted, they are, because that's basically what the entire Persian Gulf Basin is. So they do kind of already know that, but they would still have to do it anyways, but they will not have to do as much because they basically already know what's there. That's part of why the Persian Gulf has so much petroleum to begin with, is because follow the mountains here and the mountains here. It is a closed off, or mostly closed off. It has, the narrow one entryway. It is a closed off, low lying basin where water could wash in and out of, and thus you could have isolated mass die offs of phytoplankton and algae and stuff that would get buried by sediment. and not be parts, not like constantly flow through a nutrient cycle and gets consumed in everything. And also, the entire like geology of the region is a because it's been desert constantly. As desert sinks under desert, it eventually forms like sandstone and stuff. The geology underlying it is almost entirely highly porous, highly conductive sandstone. So that's why so much oil, A, has formed in the Middle East or in the Persian Gulf at least, and why so much is able to be extracted there. So much is able to actually uh, form and occur in tappable reservoirs, is because all the conditions align to allow it. So exploration is beginning there, and because of the aforementioned factors and how well known everything is already, it will go faster than it would like elsewhere in the world in a new area. But it will still be probably a year or two before the first like discoveries in that area get announced, and then a year or two or three before like some of those first ones then come online. But we are able to do stuff faster than we did before. But anyways, Iraq has been constantly held back by Saudi Arabia within OPEC, and now so has the UAE, since the UAE wants to hold a 4 million barrel per day plateau instead of a 3 million barrel per day plateau. And Iraq is getting really tired of Saudi Arabia at first, through most of the 2010s, telling it to stop increasing and hold a 4.5 million barrel per day plateau. And now Saudi Arabia telling it uh, to hold only a 4 million barrel per day plateau. So they're both sick of it and are going to leave OPEC eventually. With how instantaneously Angola left just a few weeks ago under what people thought initially were just like really petty arguments, now I'm not so sure about the length of time thing. This might actually happen a lot sooner. So I wouldn't say like a huge chance like this is what's going to happen in 2024. But if people are leaving OPEC that readily, like at the drop of a dime already, I would say there is like somewhat of a double-digit percent chance Iraq might actually leave in 2024, like as early as this year, because, like I said, they're the most tired of sticking to the plan, and also, the fact that Qatar already left, and especially now the fact that Angola left just so flippantly will probably, be like encouraging Iraq in that direction of like, oh, well, if nobody really cares, okay then. I wouldn't say it's like a huge guaranteed probability, but I would put it at like over 10 or 20% chance now that it might actually happen in 2024, like as early as this year. The UAE, I wouldn't think as likely yet, but in the overall picture, they are still eventually going to leave because, like I said, they want to hold a 4 million barrel per day plateau instead of three. And they're getting sick of being told by Saudi Arabia to stay at three, and in this case, to actually go down to like 2.7 or 2.8. So that might be coming. And like further fragmentation of OPEC might actually then proceed onwards from that. Because once you start losing like more of the bigger players, then the purpose of the group kind of starts to slip away. And you just don't really have the wherewithal and influence that you did before. All right. What else did I have on here? A check chat. Uh, hope he's okay. Hope who's okay? Me? Can can you guys not hear me? Says my bit rate's okay. And actually, even YouTube says my bit rate's okay. I mean, if I ever suddenly drop off and you guys stop hearing, like, oh, the demographer, yeah. I mean, he's alive. He just has. switched his statements and is now just saying that whatever Moscow says is what the actual reality is. Uh, as yeah, the issue is a lot of people who fled Russia initially were were dudes for obvious reasons. A lot of them, uh, and a lot of them though still kind of let their family stay behind in Russia, which is not a great decision. That's called open leverage. All right, what else did we have here? Oh, I don't know if it will happen this year, in 2024, but it might happen at some point. So, in 2022, Tajikistan here tried to invade Kyrgyzstan because they claim that Kyrgyzstan is just North Tajikistan. And despite being better equipped, having more weapons, and Kyrgyzstan effectively having just infantry and really old armored vehicles, Tajikistan got ratioed by Kyrgyzstan really hard. Their invasion did not go that well. So they might be switching targets because they claim that this chunk here of Afghanistan, called Badakhshan, they do claim that that is part of Tajikistan. And the president of Tajikistan gave a weird speech a couple days ago. He just suddenly gave a speech about how concerned he is for the humanitarian crisis and the plight of the people in Afghanistan, particularly the regions that border Tajikistan, which is, kind of a weird thing to spontaneously say. So I'm going to interpret that as our Kyrgyzstan grab failed, so we're going to try an Afghanistan grab thing. And Afghanistan grabs don't work for anybody, not even the US. It just doesn't work. That's not how reality works. But Tajikistan might be about to try it uh, because the their current dictator can't really uh, just try to carry on normally after the whole failure with Kyrgyzstan. So he's got to try something else. And Uzbekistan wouldn't really work. They would get crushed. Uh, they don't actually border Turkmenistan, so they can't go that way. Uh, you know, they're welcome to try reclaiming this chunk here, which is part of China at the moment. They're welcome to try reclaiming that. I mean, that would totally go really well. So the only other option I guess, he feels like he has is trying the Badakhshan province of Afghanistan, since Tajikistan claims that, and it was actually historically part of different versions of Tajikistan. I think I don't remember what Tajikistan was. It wasn't like the Tajik Empire. I think it was the Tajik Khanate or something like that. Because that was what a lot of the stuff in Central Asia was usually, especially post-Mongol. It was usually the something something Khanate or Khazar 8 or something like that. So he's potentially going to be trying for the Badakhshan province of Afghanistan. Uh, I don't know whether that's something that will happen this year, 2024, or just something he's intending in general for like the rough immediate future. In terms of things that are happening this year, 2024, doing sort of a rapid fire since we're almost at. I have my thing still set at Alaska time because I refuse to be disassociated. But we're almost at 9 Eastern time. Algeria will be going up to 12 billion cubic feet of natural gas production over the course of 2024, as they were constantly holding about 10 billion cubic feet per day, and they are capable of more than that. They're even just their current fields, let alone the unexplored stuff and their shale gas that they're only just starting to get into. But even just their current legacy fields are capable of like 14 to 16. but the demand's never been there for them because Europe was always getting stuff from Russia instead. But now that the demand's there, they've been rapidly drilling the additional wells and tying in the additional pipeline stuff. And the first batch of it got finished at the end of 2023. And over the course of December, they already went from 10 up to 10.3. And by mid 2024, they should be up to a full 12 billion cubic feet per day. Then at the end of 2024, they should start another ramp up, which then over 2025 will take them up to 14 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas production. And I talked about US oil production in general previously and Canadian, but specifically back up home in Alaska. At the end of 2023, this year, the Willow project got approved, which is down here. It won't come online until 2029, but it'll be about 200,000 barrels a day on initial startup. As the way fields work now, with the exception of shale, because shale, to even maintain the production, you have to rapidly drill as many wells as possible, as constantly as possible, and have them instantly come online as soon as you drill them. But the way we do fields now is we drill all the wells first and then turn the field on at a point once everything's ready. So now instead of for individual fields, now instead of climbing up and peaking and then coming down, now what you see is a field starts up and it kind of just shoots up to a specific level. Like in Willow's case, it will be 200,000 barrels per day, and it holds that level while the pressure gradient is able to for about like 2 or 3 years, and then it turns into a decline from there. So that's how we do oil fields now, for the most part at least, especially offshore ones. Now, Prudhoe Bay was the big discovery way back when, although Prudhoe Bay is close to dead now. But what we've been doing, a few things were done over here, but we've been primarily stepping our way westward with exploration in North Alaska. There is there are a few fields over in this area up towards the coast that are about like 40,000 or 60,000 barrels a day each that will be coming online in 2025. And then around the same time as Willow in 2029 or so, initially it was hoped for 2026, but that got pushed back because the company that was originally doing it sold it. Smith Bay up here. This is Smith Bay, a really large oil field, not as big as Prudhoe was at the start, but pretty big, was discovered under Smith Bay. And the company that was initially doing stuff backed out and sold things. And so it went over to new operators that are the primary operators that are regularly on the North Slope. And they filed the stuff to back in 2022 to actually get permission. They drew up like all their plans, like this is the spill containment plan. This is the plan for how the pipelines would go. This is how they would be buried to not obstruct the ecosystem. This is how we would do this, this, and this, and we agreed to pay this tax rate because that's how we up in Alaska gets most of our state revenue is from oil taxes, along with now mining taxes. It's about 35% on oil revenue and 6 or so percent on mining revenue. And but they filed that, and we just got the notice a few weeks ago from the Alaska state government that it has been stamped and approved. So Smith Bay is greenlit. Now, unfortunately, it will take a while because the furthest stuff out we have so far is around here, just west of the river, just west of Alpine. So they are going to have to do extension pipelines out to that, and but that has been approved, so that's going to be drilled up and ready. And 2029 is the expected start date. It hopefully, if it's in God's will, it will be a bit earlier. But 2029, that will come on as well, which will be between 200 and 250. So 200 from Willow, and we'll assume 200 from Smith Bay, though it'll probably end up being 250. So in 2029, Alaska will suddenly up jump by 400,000 barrels per day of production. which then obviously means the U.S. will then get that as a boost in production. By that time, the U.S. will have entered its second and final terminal decline. Though in between now and then, also there are other fields that are coming online on the North Slope, like the ones I said in 2025, and one in 2026 that's going to be 120,000 barrel per day boost. The ones that have come on recently, including ones that started up this year, have brought us for Alaska as a whole back up from around 430 or 440 back up to about 500,000 barrels per day. And including the declines that will occur over the course of this year, 2024, those would see us drop back down to probably 470 by the time 2025 comes, in which those two oil fields that I mentioned will start in 2025. They will have a combined upward jump of about 120 for the state between the two of them, which will then boost us back up to between 550 and 600. Then the 121 in 2026 that will boost us up to like 650, again accounting for declines. And then we'll decline back down to uh, excluding any other new projects in between now and then. Uh, Over 2027 and 2028, we would then decline back down to like a flat 6,000 or 600,000 before Smith Bay and Willow start up, which would then boost us back up to or just over 1 million barrels per day. So that is, or work on Smith Bay is something that will be starting this coming year, 2024, as like I said, the approval was finally stamped out by the state government in early this month that's about to end in early December of 2023. So that is oncoming now. Uh, Quick other things. What do we have here? Uh, Price wise, copper has been making its way up again, kind of towards where it should be. Where it should be is honestly around like 450 or above, actually. And it has constantly gone up like closer to where it should be, but then it always keeps falling back down. And they keep using the same excuse of what about the interest rates? It doesn't matter. You have something called the rate of copper consumption and rate of copper mining and rate of copper reprocessing. Those are numbers that are publicly available. And yes, the banks keep raising the interest rates, but the copper numbers have been relatively unchanged. But and especially with the whole silver deficit thing, but they still keep pulling that same excuse. And like I said, the longer you hold back from what you should be doing, the more you're going to face plant into a brick wall and just jump upward straight up when the time comes. But over 2024, because it looks like they're starting to acknowledge the reality, copper seems to be the most likely one that might go up to where it actually should be, which is around or above $4.50 per pound, because of various things that are happening. Constant mine shutdowns in Peru because of mass anti-government protests that are blocking all kinds of infrastructure. That by all means, the government is the villain in this case. The protesters are not like doing this to like block the mines or anything. The Peruvian government, the current one, actually kind of needs a bit of a rearrangement. Then there's Chile, who has, as I told you guys, constantly just not permitted mining project expansions or new copper mining operations, despite copper basically being like the primary thing that earns them the most government revenue. They did later in 2023, they finally approved one whole new mining expansion. So Chile's copper output has been declining for the last few years. And also, Panama decided to cancel and shut down that copper mine that they were operating. It output about 200,000 tons per year, which isn't a huge amount. That's about 1% of global supply, but that is a guaranteed off now. Russian output is declining, although Russia didn't supply too much of the global supply, but Russia's output is declining because we are, and that did start happening earlier than I thought it would. Uh, but we have passed the points where I expected a cutoff, especially from a lot of parts suppliers and mining equipment suppliers, would start to see mechanical cannibalization between vehicles and a downturn in Russian mining output. And it has, on average, dropped about 4% in terms of Russian mining output across different resources. Some only about like 2 or 3%, some as much as down by 12%. On average, collectively about 4. So there's all kinds of angles, plus the whole EV charging station buildup surge and the EV production line surge itself, because the EVs use a lot of copper. So copper should not still be this low, but it looks like, especially because of the like longer march this one is, as opposed to just a jump, it looks like this might be the market finally acknowledging some portion of reality. So for 2024, maybe at least copper will go up to where it should be. Silver, I've become convinced, is just going to be kept this low until the physical deficit actually becomes like a blatant absence of delivery to someone within a few years, and the brick wall is just slammed at 100 miles an hour and it just shoots up. Otherwise, if it were behaving correctly, it should be in the 30s, and honestly leaning more towards 40, but it's not at the present moment. Is anybody else? No comments, no super chats. Okay. And some other things that will be seen are technically things that happened in 2023, but we will see the data this year in 2024. China's workforce will continue its abrupt contraction as China's demographic collapse gets underway. They peaked at 763 million workers actively working, and thus, being paid, and thus paying taxes, and thus buying things, fueling the economy, and paying sales taxes on those things. However, they've hit the dive point now to where in 2022 they lost 13 million workers to retirement, and this year, based on the size of the individual demographic age brackets, I would say they will probably at least shed off 11 million more, so down to 722 million. Although it might be a bit higher than that. I think it could go as high as 14, but it should probably be 11 or more, though. So that's going to continue for them, heading in the undesirable direction. And then their actual population itself, or that will be what happened in 2023, that we will then see the data of sometime in this year, 2024. In terms of data we will get for population, China was at 1.413 billion. They dropped down to 1.412 over the course of 2023, and thus we will see data released for in 2024. They most likely have dropped down to now just below 1.41 flat, possibly down to 1.409 or 1.408. And as we progress further, this will then become an actual steeper drop, just like the total employed persons drop, which will then be not all that great for them going forward. And things were already not really going to be that great because of, the whole uh, the whole Taiwan obsession. But we will see how that all plays out. And that's probably where I'm going to end this, because I am over an hour beyond when I was supposed to stop. And I didn't get to show these, unfortunately, but I did make these. Where's the split one that I did? There it is. So I did make these for Brazil's projected oil production. We are right here. For those who are unaware, we are right here at 2023, ending at 3.73 million barrels per day for Brazil. These are the different faded scenarios based on the potential productivity of their southern offshore area, which, as I said previously, they just sold off all the auctioning stuff to, and basically everyone rushed in and bought all the available space because it is connected with the Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro offshore area, the pre-salt area. And exploration and development was done in their southern offshore area before, so they do have an idea. It is less productive than the pre-salt offshore area of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, but it is still highly productive. But it is like half-ish as much as the pre-salt area, but that's still a huge amount. So accounting for that and the stuff offshore of the Amazon River basin, I did different scenarios of how high Brazil could go. First, factoring in all of the additional production that is already locked in, stuff that is in development now that will be producing, not accounting, not stuff that is hypothetical. Then for the hypotheticals, you go up here, and like I had said previously in a different stream, towards 2040, Brazil might end up peaking closer to 6 million barrels per day than we thought. So I think one scenario has the highest at 5.2, another has the highest at like 5.4 or 5.5 or something like that. Six would be like a upper area they could get to, depending on if stuff proves like extremely prolific and if they do more stuff more quickly than is initially planned at the moment. But the amount of stuff they intend to do at the moment is already a lot of stuff and is already very quick. And then the different shades of decline here are for different field decline rates, combined and contrasted with different rates of small additional production post the big boom that's coming, as this is the last real big boom that Brazil can do production wise. So then you have those different rates going out to 2070. So I'm also making like projection graphs like this. That will be another Google Doc that I'll have. That will be Google Doc number 9, because I have 7 so far. Number 8 is going to be, or actually, this one might come first, so this might be number 8. Number 9 or number 8 is going to be a listing out of different oil and gas fields, different projects that are going to be, and like which country they're in, which year they're going to come online, and how much they will boost production by, so that you guys will have like that information you can then like go look up and like read the in-depth stuff on yourself if you want to. Then I also have that new like more modern information thing I did for Guyana as well, as they're almost certainly going up over 2 million at their final peak. But I'll be making Google Docs number 8 and 9. And I will also, as a prediction for 2024, I will also finish some of the Google Docs that I have started but not finished. I have a lot of them where I have like 70% of countries done, but not all. Keep in mind, though, when I say percent of countries, I mean out of a 100% of countries that you can actually get reliable data from and or countries that matter. I do apologize to the Pacific nation island countries and to the people of, I guess, North Korea, Lesotho, Swaziland, and other countries that don't release like energy and resource data. But I can't help you if your government doesn't release public data, and or if your consumption and or production rates are just so low that they're effectively irrelevant. But I will actually be completing some of those Google Docs this year, and most likely I will actually have to do that dreaded stream I told you guys about. The obligatory cringy who am I like meet the streamer stream. If I reach I said I would do if I reached 10,000 subs, which I was so grateful to God for, because my sub count hit 9.8 but then started decreasing and went back down to like 9.7. But now, unfortunately, it started going back up again and has gone from 9.7 back up to 9.76. So now it looks like it might actually go up to 10,000, which means I'll have to do that stream that I talked about, which I don't look forward to. So that might happen or it might not. I would hope it doesn't happen, but it might happen. But anyways, that's going to be it for this one. So thank you everybody for sticking around and listening. Or if anybody had any specific statements or questions or super chats or anything, I'll wait like 30 seconds before actually leaving. So let me take this opportunity to chug some water then. Ugh. Okay, water chugged and see ya from Josh. Okay, I think so. That seems like a 15-second delay. That seems to be about the average. Actually, I think this was like the first time I've ever gone through everything that was on the notepad page as well, or almost everything. I forgot. It looks like one thing, but it's been too long, so I don't care at this point. All right. Looks like nothing from anybody else. So, yes, Happy New Year to you guys as well. I will see you around in the next videos, which will be the overdue monthly updated like electricity demand videos and natural gas production levels video. So I'll get those out whenever I can, and I will keep updating the Google Docs with further information. The electricity generation mix pie chart graphs one should be getting the next one to get a big update in like a day or two. So constantly check on those things if you're still waiting for info on those from your specific country. But that's it, and I'm out.